Okay, Joe Gerber.
Hi.
How are you? Back in town? Are you back to work?
For now, yeah. Busy.
Okay, well.
Spring market came a little late today.
Did it?
Yeah.
So excited to have Joe.
Thank you.
Joe's with
me.
Compass. Met Joe kind of like going to Brokers Opens and chatted with you. And I called him and tried to recruit him for a major brand for a long time, and he kept turning me down. And then he eventually came, and now he's made another move. But Joe, one of the things that I really like about you is that you never meet a stranger. You're the most inclusive person I've met in a long, long time.
Thank you.
Yes, I've got the gray hair. You're much younger than me.
I have 3 now.
You have 3?
Gray
oh my
hairs.
God. I started plucking them out in my 20s.
I'm so excited to have them. I won't pluck them out.
But you make me feel that we're just on the same level.
Yeah.
I don't feel old around you. I don't feel middle-aged. I feel like we are pretty much in sync on a lot of the things that we believe about business, how to conduct that business. We like to throw ideas off of each other. You're always very open to those ideas. And I would love for you to talk to me about, June was LGBTQ month. Did you do your float this year?
I didn't, but it was because I was in Canada for the majority of the month.
I kind of wondered, how are you doing all this stuff? How are you doing all this stuff? But because you're one of the few, really openly gay people that I know in real estate, how would you say that, you decided to get into real estate? Did you ever have a thought about, am I going to be accepted? Are people going to want to work with me? How am I going to be treated? Did that ever come up in your mind when you were kind of thinking about real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trajectory of my career has been unique. My dad was a manager for a big firm that was consolidated and acquired many times in Highland Park, and so that was my first exposure to a real estate office.
Okay.
I was maybe 4th, 5th, and 6th grade that he was working there.
Oh yeah.
And then when I was 14, I got a job working for a pretty top producing North Shore broker who's actually at Compass. It's kind of exciting to work with her now.
Okay.
And really, it was just a hobby job. I liked being in an office. I was a nerd. It was cool to be in an office with other realtors. I never thought I would do real estate. And then in high school, probably about I was 15, 16, we were moving from my house in Deerfield, and I was standing on the front porch. This is one of my aha moments. It was the first of 2. I was standing on my front porch, and I could count half of my block that went into foreclosure after the 2008 crash. And I really had a moment where I was not that we obviously can impact the economy in the same way that the banks do, but I had this moment where it's I want to be a part of these people's story. I want to help them transition from maybe a tough moment into a really great moment, or from a great moment to a better moment. And then the second kind of aha moment was, I didn't actually, even when I went to school, I didn't major in anything real estate. I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
So I did the first year and a half as a special education major. Come from a line of teachers. My mom's a teacher. My older sister worked in education. My grandfather was a special ed bus driver. And so I was actually teaching a science lesson my sophomore year of college at a charter school on the south side.
Okay.
And I was teaching this lesson to a bunch of 6th graders, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't connect with these kids. There was some disconnect, and I think I wasn't really in it.
Right.
And then after we finished teaching our lessons for the day, we did a walking tour of the neighborhood. And we walked with a nonprofit who was working to curb foreclosure in the neighborhood, and home ownership classes and counseling, and that was the most interesting thing to me. And so my why and the reason that I got into real estate was all about equity and social justice. I consider myself a former special educator and activist. So my why is really unique, but I will say that most of my insecurity when I first got into real estate was more about my age than my sexual orientation. However, I think those two played hand in hand, because when, I think Chicago...
At the time, especially.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, this was 2018, 2019. Marriage equality was sort of a new law of the land. We had our first black president, and so that was when I first got my license. But I had been doing this since 2012 was my first job in real estate. So at that point, the sentiment obviously was very different. And I was young. So getting comfortable with my sexuality as a teenager while sort of interacting with this industry was interesting. I will say that Chicago, doing real estate, and most brokers can agree with this. When you do real estate in the city of Chicago, it's a very different environment than here on the North Shore and in the suburbs.
Yeah.
I think that in the city, it's faster paced. I think that my business has always been split between city and suburbs, rentals, listings, buyers, but I've always been based in the suburbs. So I've always lived in the suburbs.
So you knew both, because I actually did
Yes.
a quick segment that will be coming out that talked about that.
Yeah.
Are you an expert in your area? Like me, I am not a city expert, so I'm not going to pretend that I am. You truly are. You've spent a ton of time. You know that market.
Yeah.
You also know the North Shore, so you're very lucky. So for you guys looking, you've got Joe Gerber that can help you city, the shore. So keep going.
So I think the North Shore is just a different environment, and it isn't that it's less inclusive or less friendly, but there's just less presence. There's less representation,
and there's less households.
Yes, 100%.
You've got 8,500 in Glencoe.
Yes.
You've got 12,000 in Winnetka.
Yes.
You've got 22,000 in Wilmette.
Yeah.
And then in Evanston, you've got 75,000. So then if you go west, so then you get into the city and you have hundreds of thousands and millions of people to deal with.
And with the larger population of people who live there, obviously higher population of real estate brokers.
Yeah.
I'm a proud board member of NASBAR. We have 3,900 members. We're the third largest association in Illinois, but we pale in comparison in size to the Chicago Association in Main Street, which is a blessing and a curse in some ways.
Right.
And so for me, I think my goal was always to be the representation that I was struggling to see in the homogeny, now not in a derogatory sense, right? The North Shore is homogenous.
Right.
It is.
Right.
And I would say that as I've grown up and become an adult, and now I live in my own house in Highland Park, I think that it is much more, it's one thing to have an inclusive community, it's another thing to actually have a diverse population, and I think it's grown much more diverse. So for me, I think, the intersection of my real estate career and my activism has really just empowered me to try and be that representation that we're starting to see. We at NASBAR, our current president is our first, our youngest president and our first known president of Middle Eastern descent. Our immediate past president is Hispanic and Jewish. So it's interesting to see the transition we've kind of come into of a much more dynamic industry on the North Shore. And so
Couldn't agree more.
I feel like I, in my own way, have been a part of that, and that was always my motivation.
Yeah, I think to your point about the North Shore being a little bit homogenous, it's really, really true.
Yeah. And by the way, again, it isn't necessarily that we're...
It's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
It just is what it is.
It's a different perspective.
It's a different perspective. It's a different lifestyle, for one. We moved a lot when my boys were growing up.
Yeah.
And they were very fortunate to have all kinds of experiences. And I remember we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And I would pull my car up. There would be 40 young boys on the tennis court playing football.
Yeah.
And mine were the two only light-skinned boys.
Yeah.
The rest were dark-skinned boys, and they had amazing friendships.
Yeah.
Those kids spent the night. I baked cookies. I always made sure I had sweets after school. My boys don't see any difference.
Yeah.
They see no differences.
I think that's one of the things that I think you and I have really bonded over is, your kids have always been inclusive. You've always been in environments where inclusivity has been your passion. I was raised by a single mom. My mom had 3 LGBT children. I have an older sister who's trans, and my older brother is gay and married. And so I think that, even having grown up with some privilege, we, every family has their quirks, their uniques,
100%.
Their special needs, as I like to say. And so I think that I've also been approachable and been a resource for a lot of people, and that gives me more joy than anything.
So, Joe, I'm just going to toot your horn for you because you don't do it, but what I want to say to you is, I write poetry, and I haven't written a piece about you, but I'm going to, because you affect me that way.
Thank
and
you.
there are people that you meet that just truly, truly affect you in such a positive way. And we're not with the same brands anymore, But I know I can reach out to him and he's going to pick up the phone unless he's on vacay, which he seems to have been on vacay a whole lot lately. But Joe, you are a bright light.
Thank you.
And I also, the other thing is I'm actually not only jealous about, but always intrigued at your communication. You're one of the most probably diplomatic communicators that I've ever met in deals, listening to you when you were, negotiating with another agent that might be really, really tough, keeping your composure and writing your emails and your text in a way that came across for your client, but also kept a good relationship with the other agent, even if you had to say you're wrong. How did you learn to do that in the real estate industry? Because there are people out there that, I kid you not, it felt like I was being shot by an automatic weapon at times. And instead of allowing them to do that to me and get upset, I would just simply pick up the phone. Hello? Yeah, I just got your, that's not what's happening. And I'd stay very, very calm and try to keep everybody calm.
Yeah.
Where was it in your career where you went, oh, yeah, I've got to think about this before I respond?
Well, so I think it's important to have systems and to have a process. So for me, it's happened a little more lately, but when I'm dealing with another agent or a client or a vendor, I've been, lately it's been a couple of lenders. I get a lot of complex deals, so it happens. It's part of the territory. I always write a response in a separate email that is probably not very respectful and professional, and it goes in my trash, right?
So you make your note. You
I think
write
having
it,
an
get
outlet.
it out.
Yes, I've been really trying to. I sleep on things, right? So I'll write a really nice response. I'll sleep on it. I'll edit it, and right. I think when you're, I think. We live in a world and we work in an industry where we want instant gratification. So it's easier to respond now than it is tomorrow. But I think the difference in that 12 hours of response time can make or break building or maintaining that relationship versus burning a bridge.
100%. And we've all, if we've done any number of deals, which you've done several, there's times where you feel like you just can't save it.
Yes, and I think the hardest part is getting to a point where you have worked so hard to keep a deal together or to negotiate, right, to try and get an agreement. And at some point you have to realize that there is nothing you can do or say to buyer, seller, other agent, lender, appraiser, attorney to save it sometimes.
Yeah.
And, I think it's difficult. I will say that I was born with, I was diagnosed when I was little with Asperger's and bipolar and a myriad of things, but and I'm not, I don't hide my history with mental health and my very intimate relationship with it.
So, Joe, that's the other thing I want to bring up. You're an open book.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, in our world right now, with so many people having to feel they have to be something that they're not be their authentic selves or whatever, you're one of the most authentic people that I know.
Thank you.
And there's no shame in struggling, because guess what? We're all struggling.
100%.
On some level.
I think that society likes to teach us that certain labels are good, certain labels are bad, right? Certain labels we want to change, hide, or shove under the rug. We can't change who we are. We're all dealt a hand of cards, and whether we deserve it or don't, it's ours to deal with. I remember I spoke at a assembly at my old school. I went to a therapeutic day school for the majority of my elementary and middle school years, and one of the things I kept saying was, you might not feel like you've deserved what you've been handed in life, but the fact of the matter is it's yours to deal with, right? And at some point, your desire to live a fruitful, happy life has to be stronger than this pain and sadness and whatever you feel. For me, I had this epiphany when I was 13 that, and it's blunt and a little dark, but it's my truth, that my desire to live had to be greater than my desire to die. That was literally what was the either or that I had to deal with.
I kind of think most people will have that crossroads at some point.
My desire to stay,
to have a conversation with yourself.
My desire to stick around and be the representation that I didn't always see had to be more important than succumbing to whatever pain I felt. And so I think in my professional career, it's allowed me to have a little bit more grace and compassion. And I have a little bit, I think we try and separate our real estate careers with our personal lives, but our career is so intimately. It's interesting because my commercial real estate peers, it's very different.
Oh yeah,
I don't want to do commercial. I have no interest, and so I think in my interactions with other parties in a transaction, my 15 plus years being in an occupational therapist's office, learning social skills, and I mean I had debilitating social developmental issues until I was about 11. So having eye contact, understanding sarcasm. Now I am sarcastic, which is fun.
So you learned a lot about human nature.
And it's allowed me to interact with other parties with a little bit more grace and a little bit more tact, because I have to work a little harder to be able to have any real normal interaction. So when the interactions are difficult, all I do is harness the skills that allow me to interact normally.
Yeah. Well, this I will say about you. You inspire me.
Thank you.
Okay. I learn from you all the time. And I just know sky's the limit for you. And you're just going to continue to go up and up.
Thank you.
Real estate, it could be anywhere. Anywhere in this industry. We could see you as the president of some huge company someday, whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot in the future for you. Right now, the way that you represent your clients, there's no way, and these clients don't always know this stuff, right? I mean, real estate can be a thankless job. We don't really get the appreciation that we deserve sometimes, and we go above and beyond, and and then we, maybe don't make as much as we should have, or they're asking us to cut back and things like that. They don't know what we do behind the scenes. But the one thing that I want to say to anybody who's worked with you and anybody who hasn't worked with Joe is you go above and beyond. You are consistently and with such vigor representing your clients in front of them, behind the scenes, in negotiations, after the sale. You go above and beyond. And there's many agents on the North Shore that I can mention. Lots of great agents that I can mention. But this, because I've witnessed how you worked, I can truly say those things about you.
Thank you.
And as somebody who's been in the business 36 years, I've encountered a lot of agents. I've done a lot of deals with agents. And if we're lucky, we get that amazing professional agent. What do you think right now about the professionalism that you're seeing in the market? Do you think there's a lot of work to be done? Do you feel that agents are not doing the work to learn, be more professional, hand in a completed contract that's completely filled out professionally, right? Call back, text back, communicate. What are you seeing, and what do you think's changed in the last year, since August last year?
I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I don't know that changed necessarily in its. I think it was brought more to the surface because of last August. I don't know that anything necessarily changed. My opinions didn't change.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the onus is on the brokerages and the associations. I think that our market, like every other market in this country, our markets are dominated by large brokerages and some boutique brokerages, and I think there's a huge discrepancy in the training we are given, that we are afforded. I think that there is something to be said that the majority of agents that get their license leave the industry within the first 5 years. I think our industry's tough. I think it chews people up and spits them out.
It does.
Which is why I love mentoring young or new agents, right? I use those two terms differently, right? Because there's, my mom had changed careers in her 40s. And so I think that there are a lot of, people that might be older in age but are newer to our business. So I think that really the onus is on the brokerages and the professional organizations to streamline their education. At some of these bigger brokerages that I've been at or interacted with, one of the themes is that they don't know where to go, right?
Right.
You've got companies with regional leadership models, so there's 5 or 6 offices with 2 or 3 managers, and the idea is that allows the company to save on their costs of having management, but it also allows that the offices to have plenty of leadership. But if you've got 5 offices that used to be the roster of 8 offices,
know all about it.
It doesn't really make the biggest difference.
Right.
And so I think that model works. I was at a brokerage with you, and we had that model, and I knew who to go, I knew who to call, I knew what resources existed. I think that new agents need to have a more thorough orientation. We at NASBAR do a really good job of having a new member orientation. The YPN and the board has a presence in all of those meetings. I think that we have a lot of support for the size of our organization when you compare us to other small ones and other large ones. So I think that there's a lack of education.
I think
and the transactional education. Like, I think that when we take our exam, right, we know the law. Well, it's one thing to know the law. It's another thing to know how to execute the law in practice.
Exactly.
I worked for 5 or 6 agents and teams as an assistant before I got my license, and solely because I wasn't old enough.
Yeah.
And I learned the most from the agents I worked for than the brokerages
100%.
I had my license
100%.
with. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be had. I don't know that I fault most of the agents. And I also think that we're in an industry where independent contractors, right? So the onus is on us too to seek that out.
So to that point,
Yeah.
I'm going to make that point too, is it is on the agent. And I think one of the things that we continue to see is people without the financial means to get into it, because it's expensive. You have to spend money in order to be successful. And there's not another business, and this is the thing that's exciting about real estate. There's not another business you could start for less than $5,000 a year. It's talking about, our dues and having your central lock and signs and cars and all that. And sky's the limit.
It's true.
You can make as much money as you want to put in. You get out of it what you put into it if you're doing the right things.
And with that comes the freedom to dig yourself into holes and to make it harder for yourself. And so I think that the other thing that, and we've tried to do this at NASBAR, is there also should be opportunities for people to learn how to manage their business financially as a business person.
That's it right there.
And so, for example, when I first got my license, I was a super senior in college. And so I had about a year and a half left. And so my first year full time was actually my last half of my second year. My dad sort of said, all right, I'm going to help you. So instead of giving you a few $100s for books, I'm going to give you a few $100s for marketing. And I built my entire career on postcards to 50 people that I put together in my sphere and free Facebook posts.
You've got new business all the time. I'm always seeing your new listings in the city, on the North Shore.
And one of the things I'll say about that is my business is 99% referral based. So, I've closed since I got my license in 2018 almost 400 transactions and at least $100 million. And I would say that I think the figure I did last year when I business plan was 99.6% of those are either from repeat business or from someone I know. So my clients, the majority of them, there are a small fraction, maybe on one hand, in 5 years, that don't know me or know someone that knows me.
Yeah.
And that's a remarkable. I've never spent money on leads. It works for some people. I don't like that.
You haven't had to.
Yes.
You haven't had to. You've found what works.
Yes.
Now, listen, I've met agents that, there's agents out there that don't have personalities. You draw people in. You're one of those, like I said, you bring people into the honey hive. And that is, you include people. You're going to invite them whether they show up or not, but you're going to invite them and include them. And you include people in your success, too, and which I really, really love.
Thank you.
But I want to go back to your heart.
Yeah.
Because we've had lots of great conversations in the past. And, at the end of the day, yes, as a real estate agent, a successful real estate agent, being a market expert, knowing the processes, and I say this all the time, the process stays the same. It's the transaction that changes and is constantly moving between this client and the next client. They could look completely different, but the process is the same.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I know about you is if somebody's doing a deal with you, your heart is in it 100%. And you do work with people that maybe everything's not perfect. And maybe the deal's got some hairs on it. But if there is a way to get that deal closed, Joe is the agent. He's going to do everything in his power to make sure that you get to the closing table. And I've seen your heart,
Thank
and
you.
that's probably going to be some of my poetry when I write my piece about you. What did I see?
Yeah.
Who is this person? Joe, what else would you like to say to people who are afraid to get into the business, afraid of judgment, afraid of failure? And I always say failure it's not final.
Failure is how you get to win.
It's feedback.
Yep.
And you just have to pivot, right? You have to pivot and say, okay, that didn't work. I had to do that when I moved here.
Yeah.
After the crash, I'm here and I looked at it as an opportunity, but I'm like, okay, what I did in Indianapolis didn't work here. I got to try something different.
Yeah.
So you do that, right? You pivot and you're like, okay, we're going to go a different direction. Every time we have to do that, we're learning.
Totally.
So what would you say was the biggest lesson that you've learned in the last 12 months about yourself and about the business?
I had this epiphany in an office meeting when you and I worked together, and there were a lot of more experienced agents who were struggling with all of these new rules about documentation and forms and rules, and so one, a couple of the agents I usually used to sit next to said, "Oh, I'm going to retire." And I thought to myself, what a bad feeling that's why you think you're going to maybe retire or step away.
Right.
So what I kept telling people was, and it's interesting because I haven't been licensed for more than a few years, but I've been in real estate for a long time, and I watched my dad in an industry where the MLS was brand new and we still had a book.
Yeah.
Right?
I was there. Yeah.
My dad and stepmom bought their house in 2000 from a book.
Yeah.
And so I always just remind a lot of people that, you lived through us digitizing the MLS, right? You walked through you remember this, when interior pictures started going online.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, they won't need us anymore.
Yeah.
Look at us now, right? So like this need to pivot has existed for a long time.
Forever.
It's in any industry you work in. I wanted to be an educator. My mom's a teacher. Every decade there's a new piece of technology that teachers aren't going to just quit and go do something else. So I think that looking at it as an opportunity, and again, the intersection of my personal experiences, I always used to say, and I say this very often, that I spent the first 15 years of my life feeling like the world would be a better place without me. So it can always be worse, right?
And look at you now.
Right? And so I think that we have to be looking at the silver lining. Every
100%.
failure, every difficult obstacle is an opportunity to train to jump higher over that obstacle.
And that's a whole conversation we could have about my life too, which we're not covering today. But
next week.
But Joe, I just want to tell you that you mean a lot to me.
Thank you.
You really inspire me,
Thank
and I know
you.
you inspire a lot of people out there. Keep being you.
Thank you.
We need you.
Thank you.
We love you.
Thank you.
And appreciate you.
feeling
Although
is
I'm very
mutual.
jealous he's going out of town again.
Yeah.
But thank you for everything that
Thank
you do. And Joe Gerber, Compass, North Shore, also works in the city.
It's
thank
weird
you so
seeing
much.
someone else say that all about me.
I know, but I mean it all.
Thank
and
you.
I am going to write you a poem.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
to Dose of Deanne. Hope you enjoyed the segment, and tune in next time.